Jake Martinez wiped sweat from his forehead as he checked the mining equipment for the third time that morning. The sun on planet Kepler 442b burned hotter than he expected, and his maintenance suit felt like an oven. He was just a regular engineer from Texas who fixed things when they broke, but somehow he ended up on this alien world with creatures that could probably eat him for breakfast. The exploration ship Hughes Discovery had landed 3 days ago on this rocky planet to check for valuable minerals. Jake worked with a team of aliens from different worlds who all belonged to something called the Galactic Cooperation Council. Most of them looked nothing like humans and had names he could barely pronounce. Dr. Lisa Park, the only other human on the survey team, spent her time studying the local animals with her fancy scanning equipment. She seemed excited about every new bug or plant they found. The alien crew members were more careful than humans and always followed their safety rules exactly. Zara Velinari was one of the aliens Jake found most interesting. She belonged to a species called the Zolani, who looked almost human except for their pale blue skin and large silver eyes. Zara worked as a communications officer and could speak 12 different alien languages. She was smart and always asked logical questions about everything. The Korathi were another type of alien on the team. They had gray skin and big heads full of brains. Dr. Thexan was their scientist who loved to measure and study everything twice before making any decisions. He carried around tablets and devices that beeped constantly while recording data. Then there were the Vexstar military aliens who looked like they could crush rocks with their bare hands. Commander Krolthak had dark green skin and muscles everywhere. His people were warriors, but even they followed strict rules about when to fight and when to retreat. Jake finished checking the drilling equipment and walked toward the temporary camp they had set up near a canyon. The landscape looked like pictures he had seen of Mars, all red rocks and strange crystal formations. Dr. Park had warned everyone that the local wildlife might be dangerous, but so far they had only seen small creatures that ran away when humans or aliens got close. "Hey, Jake," Pete Collins called out from the communication array. Pete was his old friend from engineering school back on Earth, and the only person who understood his jokes about fixing things with duct tape and prayer. The doc found something interesting about 5 clicks south of here. She wants the whole team to check it out. Jake grabbed his toolkit and plasma wrench. The plasma wrench was supposed to be for cutting metal, but it packed enough energy to probably hurt anything that tried to bite him. He had learned to always carry something that could double as a weapon after reading about all the dangerous animals on different planets. The survey team gathered at the edge of camp. Guy Park looked excited as she showed them readings on her scanner. "I am detecting large life forms moving in coordinated patterns," she said. "The energy signatures suggest they are much bigger than anything we have seen so far." Commander Krolthak studied the data and nodded slowly. "We will observe from a safe distance," he decided. Council protocols require maintaining at least 500 meters from unknown predators. The team walked south through the rocky terrain. Jake noticed how differently everyone moved. The aliens all stayed in perfect formation and stopped to scan for threats every few minutes. Pete and Dr. Park tried to copy their careful movements, but Jake found it boring. He had grown up hiking in Texas, where you just watched for snakes and kept walking. After 20 minutes, they reached a ridge overlooking a deep valley. Dr. Park set up her equipment and started recording. Through her viewer screen, Jake could see the creatures she had detected. "Holy cow," Pete whispered. 6 massive beasts were moving through the valley like they owned the place. Each one was the size of a small truck, with 6 powerful legs and spines made of some kind of crystal running down their backs. Their heads looked like they belonged on a dragon, with teeth designed for tearing apart anything they could catch. "Fascinating," Dr. Thexan said, while his equipment beeped faster. The creatures appear to have acidic saliva based on the way they are dissolving those rock formations. Razorbacks, Dr. Park said. I am going to call them razorbacks because of those crystal spines. Zara was taking notes on her communication device. My species encountered similar predators on Zelani Prime thousands of years ago, she said. They are extremely dangerous and should be avoided at all costs. Jake watched the razorbacks hunt something in the valley. They moved like a pack of wolves, but each one was bigger than any earth animal he had ever seen. One of them breathed what looked like acid onto a boulder, and the rock started smoking and melting. We should return to camp, Commander Krolthak decided. This area is too dangerous for scientific observation. The team started walking back toward their base camp. Jake stayed at the back of the group, still thinking about those incredible creatures. He had never seen anything so dangerous and amazing at the same time. They were halfway back to camp when Zara's communication device started beeping frantically. She looked at the screen, and her silver eyes went wide with alarm. The motion sensors at camp are detecting multiple large life forms approaching from the east, she announced. Dr. Park quickly set up her portable scanner and pointed it toward their camp. The readings made her face go pale. There are at least 8 razorbacks moving directly toward our position, she said. They will reach the camp in approximately 10 minutes. Commander Krolthak immediately activated his emergency beacon. All personnel will evacuate to the shuttles immediately, he ordered. Council Protocol 77 Alpha is now in effect. The team started running toward camp. Jake could see the shuttles in the distance, but they seemed very far away. Behind them, he could hear strange roaring sounds that made his skin crawl. When they reached the camp, chaos erupted everywhere. Alien crew members were grabbing essential equipment and running toward the 2 shuttle craft. Emergency lights flashed. Red and warning sirens wailed across the rocky landscape. Jake saw the first razorback emerge from behind a large boulder near the communication array. The creature was even more terrifying up close than it had looked through Dr. Park's viewer. Its crystal spines glowed with some kind of internal energy, and acid dripped from its massive jaws. More razorbacks appeared from different directions, surrounding the camp like they had planned this attack. Jake realized these animals were not just predators, but intelligent hunters who knew how to use strategy. The alien crew members reached their shuttles and began the startup procedures. Jake grabbed Pete's arm and started running toward the nearest shuttle. Behind them, Dr. Park was trying to save her research data while backup alarms screamed warnings about the approaching creatures. That was when Jake heard Zara scream. Jake spun around and saw Zara lying on the ground near the equipment storage area. She had tripped over a loose cable while running and twisted her ankle badly. The largest razorback Jake had ever seen was moving toward her with deadly purpose, its crystal spines glowing brighter as it prepared to attack. Every instinct told Jake to keep running toward the shuttle like the other crew members were doing. The alien protocols made perfect sense. Save as many lives as possible by avoiding unnecessary risks. But something deeper than logic kicked in when he saw Zara in danger. Jake changed direction and ran straight toward the massive predator. Jake, no, Pete shouted from the shuttle ramp. Are you completely insane? The other aliens stopped their evacuation procedures to stare in shock. In all their recorded history, no sentient species had ever voluntarily engaged these apex predators in direct combat. The logical response was always to retreat and call for proper military support with heavy weapons. Jake pulled his plasma wrench from his tool belt as he charged. The razorback was easily 12 feet tall and probably weighed more than a car. Its acidic breath had already started melting the metal equipment around Zara. This was definitely the stupidest thing he had ever done in his life. The creature turned toward Jake and let out a roar that shook the ground. Its 6 legs gave it perfect balance as it swiped at him with claws that could slice through starship hull plating. Jake rolled under the massive paw and came up right beside the Razorback's jaw. Without hesitation, he swung his plasma wrench upward with every ounce of strength he possessed. The tool connected with the joint where the creature's jaw met its skull and sent a massive surge of energy through its nervous system. The Razorback dropped like a fallen tree. Jake stood there breathing hard, still holding his plasma wrench, hardly believing what had just happened. The other Razorbacks in the area stopped moving and stared at him like they had never seen anything so impossible. "By the 7 moons of Karafi Prime," Dr. Thexine whispered, "how is that human still alive?" Commander Krolthak was already scanning Jake with his military equipment, looking for cybernetic enhancements or genetic modifications that could explain what they had just witnessed. The readings showed nothing unusual, just a standard human. With elevated adrenaline levels, Jake helped Zara to her feet. Her ankle was sprained, but not broken, and she could walk if she leaned on his shoulder. The other Razorbacks seemed confused by what had happened to their pack leader and were backing away slowly. "We need to move now," Jake said. "These things are smart, and they are going to figure out what happened pretty quickly." The team made it to the shuttles without further incident. As they lifted off from the planet's surface, every alien crew member was staring at Jake like he had just performed. Magic. DR Park was already reviewing her scanner recordings of the fight, trying to understand how a human had defeated a creature that outweighed him by thousands of pounds. In 847 years of Galactic Council exploration, Commander, Krolthak said slowly, "no species has ever survived direct combat with an Alpha Razorback. Our military databases contain no successful engagement protocols for these creatures." Jake shrugged and put his plasma wrench back in his tool belt. "I just hit it in the right spot," he said. "My dad taught me that every animal has a weak point. If you can find it." Zara was sitting beside him in the shuttle, still processing what had happened. Her logical Zilani mind was trying to calculate the probability of Jake's survival and coming up with numbers close to 0. Yet here he was, completely unharmed, and acting like charging at deadly predators was perfectly normal. "Why did you come?" "Back for me?" she asked. The logical action was to continue to the shuttle and preserve your own life. Jake looked at her like the question did not make sense. "You were in trouble," he said. "I could not just leave you there." Diardexon was recording everything on his scientific equipment. "This behavior contradicts all known patterns of intelligent species survival instincts," he muttered. "Humans appear to operate on emotional decision-making processes that override logical self-preservation." When they returned to the Discovery, word of Jake's impossible victory spread through the ship faster than a computer virus. Alien crew members who had never spoken to humans before started approaching him in the corridors, asking questions about human combat techniques and psychological responses. The ship's medical officer, an insect-like creature named Dr. Zixtel, wanted to study Jake's brain patterns to understand how humans made split-second decisions under extreme stress. The military officers wanted to know if other humans possessed similar combat abilities. Captain Maya Rodriguez, the human commander of the Discovery, called Jake to her office for a private conversation. She had served in space for 15 years and had seen how other species viewed human behavior. "You realize you just changed how every alien in the galaxy thinks about our species," she said. "The Galactic Council has always considered humans to be useful but unpredictable. Now they are going to want to understand what makes us different." Jake sat in the chair across from her desk and tried to explain something he did not fully understand himself. "I did not think about it," he said. "Zara needed help, and I was the only one close enough to do something. It seemed simple." "That is exactly what makes it complicated," Captain Rodriguez replied. "Other species spend time analyzing threats and calculating optimal responses. You saw a problem and acted immediately on instinct. That scares them and fascinates them at the same time. Meanwhile, Zara was in her quarters trying to write a report about the incident for the Zelani Council. Her people valued logical analysis above all else, but she found herself struggling to explain Jake's actions in terms her superiors would understand. She kept thinking about the moment when he turned around and ran toward the Razorback instead of continuing to safety. Every calculation suggested was a suicidal decision, but somehow it had worked perfectly. More importantly, he had made that choice to save her life without hesitation. Zara realized she wanted to understand humans better, especially Jake Martinez. Her species had studied thousands of different cultures, but they had never encountered beings who made decisions based on something called emotion rather than pure logic. That evening, Jake found Zara in the ship's observation lounge, staring out at the stars through the large viewing window. She was holding a datapad, but did not seem to be reading it. "How is your ankle?" he asked as he sat down beside her. "The medical treatment was successful," she replied. "Dr. Zixtal says I will have full mobility within 2 standard days." They sat quietly for a while, watching the stars drift past as the Discovery traveled toward their next assignment. Finally, Zara turned to look at Jake with her large silver eyes. "I have been trying to understand why you risked your life for someone you barely know," she said. "My logical analysis suggests your behavior was irrational and dangerous." Jake smiled at her serious expression. "Maybe it was irrational," he admitted. "But sometimes doing the right thing is not about logic. It is about caring enough to try, even when the odds are bad." Zara considered this explanation carefully. On her homeworld, decisions were made by calculating the greatest benefit for the greatest number of individuals. Personal attachments were considered inefficient and potentially harmful to group survival. But watching Jake charge at that Razorback had shown her something her species had never experienced: the power of individual courage motivated by concern for another person. It was illogical and beautiful at the same time. "I would like to learn more about human thinking," she said finally. "Perhaps you could teach me about these emotional decision-making processes." Jake grinned and settled back in his chair. "I would be happy to try," he said. "But I should warn you, even we humans do not always understand why we do the things we do." Outside the viewing window, the stars continued their ancient dance through space, while 2 very different species began the process of understanding each other. Over the following weeks, Jake found his daily routine completely changed. Everywhere he went on the Discovery, alien crew members wanted to talk to him about human behavior and fighting techniques. The Korathi scientists asked endless questions about his decision-making process during the Razorback encounter, while the Vextar military officers wanted to know if he could teach them his combat methods. Jake tried to explain that he was not a professional fighter, just a maintenance engineer who had grown up fixing farm equipment in rural Texas. But the alien seemed convinced that all humans possessed some kind of special warrior training that their species lacked. The human demonstrates what our military analysts call adaptive aggression, Commander Krolfek explained to a group of officers in the ship's briefing room. "While we calculate optimal attack vectors and wait for numerical superiority, humans engage immediately with whatever tools are available." Dr. Thekson had filled 3 data tablets with observations about Jake's psychological responses. "Human emotional processing appears to bypass traditional logical pathways," he reported. "They make decisions based on what they call gut feelings rather than statistical analysis." But the alien who showed the most interest in understanding humans was Zara. She began spending her off-duty hours with Jake, asking questions about everything from human history to their strange habit of keeping pets. Her logical Zelani mind was fascinated by how humans could make decisions that seemed completely irrational, but somehow worked out well. On my world, we have committees that spend months analyzing every major choice, she told Jake as they walked through the ships. Arboretum. But you decided to fight that razorback in less than 3 seconds. How is such rapid decision-making possible? Jake stopped beside a flowering plant that reminded him of roses from Earth. I guess we do not have time to think about everything, he said. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts and hope for the best. Zara found this concept both terrifying and attractive. Her species had eliminated most forms of uncertainty from their lives through careful planning and logical analysis. The idea of acting on pure instinct was like jumping off a cliff without knowing how deep the water was below. Would you like to see some human entertainment? Jake asked. Maybe it would help you understand how we think. That evening, Jake set up the ship's entertainment system in one of the recreation rooms and introduced Zara to human movies. He started with action films from Earth's archives, thinking they might help explain human attitudes toward conflict and danger. They watched Rocky first, and Zara was completely confused by the entire concept. Why does the human boxer continue fighting when he is obviously going to lose? She asked. The logical choice would be to surrender and avoid further injury. Jake paused the movie and tried to explain. Rocky is not fighting to win, he said. He is fighting to prove to himself that he can go the distance. It is about not giving up on something that matters to you. Zara studied the screen where Rocky was getting beaten up, but still standing. So he chooses to endure pain for a psychological victory rather than a practical one. Exactly, Jake said. Sometimes the most important battles are not about winning or losing. They are about showing yourself and others that you will not quit when things get tough. This concept was revolutionary to Zara's way of thinking. Her species valued efficiency above all else, and deliberately choosing a more difficult path seemed like madness. But she was beginning to see that human madness might actually be a different kind of wisdom. They watched several more movies over the following days, including Die Hard and The Avengers. Each film showed humans choosing to fight overwhelming odds instead of retreating to safety and calling for backup. Zara started to understand that this behavior was not accidental, but a fundamental part of human nature. Your species appears to have evolved in an environment where retreat was not always possible, she observed. So you developed psychological mechanisms that allow you to keep fighting even when logic suggests the situation is hopeless. Jake nodded as he cleaned his plasma wrench in the ship's maintenance bay. My grandfather used to say that courage is not about not being afraid. It is about doing what needs to be done, even when you are scared out of your mind. Dr. Park joined their conversation, having overheard from the next workstation. Evolutionary biology supports Zara's theory, she said. Humans evolved as persistence hunters who often had to chase prey for hours or days. We also faced predators that were bigger and stronger than us, so we learned to use tools and teamwork to survive. Most other species evolved in environments where the safest strategy was to avoid conflict until you had overwhelming advantages, she continued. But humans often had to fight or die, so we developed what psychologists call optimism bias, the tendency to believe we can succeed even when the odds are terrible. Zara found this explanation fascinating. So when Jake attacked the razorback, he was following millions of years of evolutionary programming? Partly, Dr. Park replied. But he was also making a conscious choice to risk his life for someone else. That is where human emotion becomes more important than pure survival instinct. As the weeks passed, Zara began to notice changes in her own thinking. She found herself making faster decisions and relying more on intuition rather than lengthy analysis. Her Zilani supervisors were concerned about these changes, but Zara felt like she was discovering parts of herself that had always been there but never expressed. One evening, The Discovery received a priority distress signal from a Karathi research station in the Vega system. The automated message indicated that the station was under attack by unknown creatures and their defensive systems had failed. Captain Rodriguez called an emergency meeting in the main briefing room. The senior staff gathered around the holographic display showing the location of the research station, which was 3 days away at maximum warp speed. The station houses 47 researchers working on quantum physics experiments, the captain explained. They have been under siege for 6 days, and their life support systems are beginning to fail. Commander Krolfek studied the tactical situation. Our analysis suggests we should proceed to the station with full military escort, he said. Estimated arrival time with proper support vessels would be 8 standard days. They will be dead in 8 days, Jake said from his seat. At the back of the room. Someone needs to get there faster. Captain Rodriguez looked at the display again. A small rescue team could reach the station in 4 days using a modified shuttle, she said. But we have no information about what kind of creatures they are, facing or how many of them there are. I volunteer to lead the rescue mission, Jake said immediately. The room fell silent. Dr. Thexon was the first to speak. The probability of success for a small team against unknown predators is less than 12%, he calculated. The probability of success for those researchers if we do nothing is 0%. Jake replied. Commander Krolthak activated his tactical analysis system. A 4-person team with the right equipment might be able to extract the researchers before the main fleet arrives, he admitted. But it would require someone with experience fighting these types of creatures. Zara surprised everyone, including herself, by speaking up. I volunteer to accompany Jake as communications specialist, she said. My linguistic abilities would be valuable for coordinating with the trapped researchers. The other aliens stared at her in shock. Zelane were known for their caution and logical decision-making, not for volunteering for dangerous rescue missions with terrible odds of success. Captain Rodriguez studied the faces around the table. Pete Collins and Torgak will complete the team, she decided. You leave in 2 hours. As the meeting ended and everyone filed out of the briefing room, Jake caught up with Zara in the corridor. Are you sure about this? He asked. It is going to be dangerous, and we might not make it back. Zara looked at him with her large silver eyes and smiled for the first time since he had known her. I am learning to make decisions like a human, she said. Sometimes the most logical choice is to do something completely illogical for someone you care about. Jake felt his heart skip a beat at her words. He was beginning to realize that his feelings for Zara had grown beyond simple friendship, and apparently the feeling was mutual. Then let us go save some scientists, he said, grinning back at her. 2 hours later, their modified shuttle launched from the Discovery's hangar bay and set course for the Vega system at maximum speed. In the passenger compartment, Jake was checking their equipment while Zara reviewed the research station's layout on her communication device. Pete was running diagnostics on the shuttle systems, and Torgak was sharpening his ceremonial Vexstar combat blades. It was probably the strangest rescue team in Galactic Council history, but Jake had a good feeling about their chances. The shuttle dropped out of warp drive at the edge of the Vega system after 4 days of hard travel. Through the viewscreen, Jake could see the Karathi research station spinning slowly against the star field, but something was clearly wrong. Sections of the outer hull showed damage from what looked like claw marks, and several communication arrays had been completely destroyed. Pete ran sensor scans while Zara tried to establish contact with the trapped researchers. Her equipment picked up faint life signs from the station's central laboratory, but the main communication systems were not responding. I am detecting at least 30 large life forms moving through the station's outer sections, Pete reported. Energy signatures match the Razorbacks we encountered on Kepler 442b. But there are also some much larger readings that do not match anything in our database. Torgak checked his weapons and armor one final time. The Vex-Tar warrior had painted traditional battle symbols on his face and looked ready to fight anything they might encounter. "The creatures have turned the station into their hunting ground," he said grimly. "This will not be a simple extraction." Jake studied the station's layout on Zara's display screen. The research facility was built in sections connected by maintenance tunnels, which gave them options for moving around without being detected. The trapped Korathi were in the central lab, but they would have to get past multiple groups of predators to reach them. "The mining charges in the station's equipment bay could be useful," Jake said, pointing to the schematics. "If we can create controlled explosions in the right places, we might be able to separate the creatures and confuse them long enough to get the researchers out." Zara analyzed his suggestion using her logical training. "The plan has a 43% chance of success based on the available data," she calculated. "However, those odds improve significantly if we can coordinate our movements precisely." 43% is better than 0%, Jake replied. "And sometimes you have to take calculated risks to save lives." Their shuttle docked at one of the station's emergency airlocks on the side opposite from where the life form readings were strongest. Jake led the team through the airlock with his plasma wrench ready, while Torgak covered their rear with his energy rifle. The interior of the research station was a mess. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through corridors filled with damaged equipment and torn metal panels. Jake could smell something that reminded him of a reptile house at a zoo, but much stronger and more threatening. Zara consulted her communication device and pointed toward a maintenance shaft that led toward the equipment bay. "The tunnel system should allow us to move without being detected," she whispered, "but we need to be completely silent." They crawled through the maintenance tunnels for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Jake could hear strange clicking and scraping sounds through the walls that made his skin crawl. Whatever had taken over the station was definitely not friendly. When they reached the equipment bay, Jake carefully opened the access hatch and peered out. The room was empty of creatures, but filled with mining equipment and explosive charges, used for asteroid processing. He quietly gathered what they needed, while the others kept watch. "There are 3 main groups of creatures between us and the central lab," Zara reported after scanning with her portable sensor. 2 groups of normal-sized razorbacks and 1 group with the larger unknown species. Jake studied the station layout and formulated a plan that probably qualified as insane by anyone's standards except human ones. "We set charges in sections, 4 and 7 to create noise and confusion," he explained. "While the creatures investigate the explosions, we move through Section 6 to reach the lab." Torgak nodded approvingly. "Distraction and misdirection are sound military tactics," he said. "The creatures will expect us to flee from the explosions, not move toward our objective." Pete looked nervous but determined. "What if some of the creatures do not take the bait?" he asked. "Then we improvise," Jake said with a grin that was probably more confident than he actually felt. They spent the next hour carefully placing explosive charges in strategic locations throughout the station. Jake had learned demolition techniques during his engineering training, and he knew how to create controlled blasts that would damage structures without destroying everything. Zara proved surprisingly good at moving quietly through the maintenance tunnels. Her logical mind had quickly calculated the most efficient routes between objectives, and she seemed to be adapting to the mission requirements better than anyone had expected. When everything was ready, they positioned themselves near the central laboratory and prepared to execute their plan. Jake could see movement through the lab's reinforced windows. The Korathi researchers were still alive, but looked exhausted and frightened. "Detonate charges in 3, 2, 1. Jake counted down. The explosions echoed through the station like Thunder. Emergency alarms that had been silent for days suddenly activated, filling the corridors with flashing lights and warning sounds. Through the walls, they could hear the creatures roaring and moving toward the explosion sites. "Now we move," Jake said. The teen sprinted through the corridors toward the central lab. Jake's heart was pounding as they passed through sections where claw marks on the walls showed how dangerous their enemies really were. Behind them, he could hear sounds that suggested at least some of the creatures had figured out the deception. They reached the laboratory just as one of the larger, unknown species appeared at the far end of the corridor. Jake got his first good look at what Dr. Park would probably call an alpha razorback, a creature that was twice the size of the normal ones, with glowing crystal spines and eyes that showed clear intelligence. "Get the researchers to the shuttle," Jake told the others. "I will hold this thing off." Zara immediately moved to the lab door and began overriding the security locks with her communication equipment. Her fingers flew over the controls as she worked to get the trapped Karathi out of their sealed refuge. The alpha razorback approached slowly, as if it was studying Jake and trying to understand what kind of threat he represented. It's massive. Head tilted to one side as it examined this small creature that stood between it and its prey. Jake gripped his plasma wrench and tried to remember everything his father had taught him about facing down dangerous animals. "Make yourself look bigger. Make noise and do not show fear," he muttered under his breath. Torgak moved up beside him with weapons ready. "Human, you do not face this creature alone," the Vextar warrior said. "My people understand the value of courage in battle." The alpha razorback let out a roar that shook dust from the ceiling and charged toward them with surprising speed. For something so large, Jake rolled to one side while Torgak opened fire with his energy rifle, but the creature's crystal spines seemed to absorb most of the energy blasts. Jake came up behind the creature and swung his plasma wrench at the joint where its rear leg connected to its body. The impact sent electrical feedback through the creature's nervous system, causing it to stumble and crash into the corridor wall. "The neural connection points are vulnerable," Jake shouted to Torgak. "Aim for the joints, not the armor." Zara had gotten the laboratory door open and was helping the exhausted Korathi researchers toward the escape route. Dr. Nexal, the lead scientist, looked like he had not slept in days, but managed to thank her in rapid Korathi as they moved. More creatures were approaching from other parts of the station. Jake could hear their claws scraping against metal as they converged on the laboratory area. The explosion diversion had worked temporarily, but now they were facing the full attention of the pack. "We need to move now," Pete called from the tunnel entrance where he was helping the researchers evacuate. The alpha razorback recovered from Jake's attack and turned toward him with what looked like anger in its intelligent eyes. It seemed to recognize that this small human was responsible for the pain it had experienced. Jake backed toward the tunnel entrance, keeping his plasma wrench ready. The creature followed him with deadly patience, as if it wanted to savor the moment when it finally caught this annoying prey. That was when Zara surprised everyone by appearing behind the alpha razorback with a plasma cutter she had taken from the laboratory equipment. Her logical mind had calculated the optimal angle of attack while the creature was focused on Jake. "The neural cluster behind the skull," she said calmly, and activated the plasma cutter. The alpha razorback collapsed. Immediately, its nervous system overloaded by the precise strike. Zara stood over the fallen creature with the plasma cutter still humming in her hands, looking like she could not quite believe what she had just done. "I think I am beginning to understand human combat tactics," she said with a slight smile. Jake stared at her in amazement. "That was incredible," he said. "How did you know where to hit it?" "I observed your attack pattern and calculated the most logical target," she replied. "Sometimes the most efficient solution requires accepting significant personal risk." The sound of approaching creatures reminded them that they were not safe yet. The team hurried through the maintenance tunnels with the rescued researchers, heading back toward their shuttle as fast as the exhausted Karafi could move. They reached the shuttle just as more Razorbacks arrived in the yard. News of the successful rescue mission spread through Galactic Council space faster than anyone expected. For the first time in recorded history, a mixed-species team had defeated Alpha Razorbacks in their own territory and rescued civilians from an active predator zone. Military strategists across dozens of worlds wanted to study the mission recordings, while Xeniop psychologists demanded access to the team members for interviews. Jake found himself promoted to head of unconventional operations for the Discovery, which basically meant he was now the person Captain Rodriguez called when normal procedures were not going to work. Pete became his deputy, specializing in technical support for what the official reports carefully described as creative problem-solving approaches. The promotion ceremony took place in the ship's main conference room with representatives from several alien governments attending via holographic communication. Commander Krolthok presented Jake with a Vex-Star Combat Medal, the first time in their military history that such an honor had been given to a non-Vex-Star. The human demonstrates tactical thinking that transcends conventional military doctrine, the commander said during his presentation. His willingness to engage superior forces with inferior weapons has provided new insights into asymmetric warfare strategies. Dr. Dixon had filled 17 data tablets with analysis of the rescue mission, and his preliminary report was already being circulated among Karathi scientific institutions. Human emotional decision-making processes appear to create tactical advantages that pure logical analysis cannot achieve, he concluded, but the person most affected by the mission's success was Zara. Her superiors in the Zalani Council had initially been concerned about her participation in such a dangerous operation, but the results spoke for themselves. She had demonstrated that combining logical analysis with human style, emotional courage, could produce outcomes that neither approach could achieve alone. Captain Rodriguez called Zara to her office 3 days after their return to discuss her future assignments. The Zalani Council has requested that you continue working with Jake's unconventional operations team, she explained. They want to study how your species can benefit from human tactical approaches. Zara sat across from the captain's desk, still processing everything that had changed in her life over the past few weeks. I have submitted a formal request for permanent transfer to this vessel, she said. My research into human behavioral patterns requires extended observation. Captain Rodriguez smiled knowingly. Is that the only reason you want to stay aboard the Discovery? Zara's pale blue cheeks showed a slight color change that Jake had learned was the Zalani equivalent of blushing. I have discovered that humans possess emotional capabilities that my species has never properly understood, she admitted. I believe continued study would benefit both our peoples, and it has nothing to do with a certain maintenance engineer. Who has been teaching you about human movies? A captain asked with amusement. That is also a factor in my decision, Zara said with the kind of honesty that her logical species valued above all else. The transfer was approved by both the Zalani Council and Starfleet Command. Jake learned about it when he found Zara moving her belongings into quarters on the same deck as his own. She had requested the assignment based on what she called optimal team coordination requirements. So you are staying? He asked as he helped her carry boxes of communication equipment. I am staying, she confirmed. My people have decided that learning human tactical approaches is worth the risk of my continued exposure to your emotional decision-making processes. Jake grinned as he set down a particularly heavy box filled with Zalani scientific instruments. Are you sure you can handle being around someone as irrational as me? Zara stopped unpacking and looked at him with her large silver eyes. I have learned that human irrationality is actually a form of advanced emotional intelligence, she said seriously. Your willingness to risk everything for people you care about creates bonds that make teams more effective than pure logic can explain. That evening, Jake invited Zara to join him in the ship's observation lounge for what he called a movie night. He had selected several human films that he thought might help her understand more about their culture and psychology. They watched The Princess Bride, and Zara was fascinated by the concept of true love motivating people to attempt impossible rescues. The character Wesley demonstrates the same behavioral patterns you showed during the research station mission, she observed. He engages superior forces with minimal resources because emotional attachment overrides logical risk assessment. Exactly, Jake said. Sometimes caring about someone gives you strength you did not know you had. As the credits rolled, they sat together on the comfortable couch facing the large viewing window. Outside, stars drifted past as the Discovery traveled toward their next assignment, somewhere in the Andromeda sector. I have been analyzing my own behavioral changes since we first met, Zara said quietly. My decision-making patterns have become less purely logical and more influenced by emotional factors. Jake turned to look at her. Is that a bad thing? My supervisors initially expressed concern, she admitted. But the results of our recent mission suggest that emotional decision-making can produce superior outcomes in certain situations. What kind of emotional factors are we talking about? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Zara was quiet for a moment, considering her words with typical Zilani precision. On my world, we have scientific terms for biological attraction and reproductive compatibility, she said. But humans have something you call love that seems to encompass much more than simple biological imperatives. Jake felt his heart start beating faster. Love is complicated, he said. It makes you want to protect someone, spend time with them, share experiences, and build a future together. It is not always logical, but it makes life better. I believe I am experiencing this emotion, Zara said, meeting his eyes directly. My attachment to you has grown beyond professional cooperation or scientific curiosity. I find myself making decisions based on how they will affect your well-being rather than optimal logical outcomes. Jake reached over and took her hand, noting how her pale blue skin felt warm and soft in his grip. I love you too, Zara, he said simply. I think I started falling for you the first time you asked me to explain why humans do irrational things. She smiled, and Jake realized it was the most beautiful expression he had ever seen. Then we are both behaving in ways that our respective species would consider suboptimal, she said. The best kind of behavior, Jake replied, and leaned in. To kiss her. The kiss was gentle and tentative at first, as two very different species learned how to express affection in ways that worked for both of them. But it quickly became something deeper and more passionate as they discovered that love really could transcend the boundaries between worlds. When they finally separated, Zara rested her head against Jake's shoulder and watched the stars through the viewing window. My people will want to study this relationship as an example of successful interspecies emotional bonding, she said. Let them study, Jake said, wrapping his arms around her. We will give them plenty of data to analyze. 2 days later, the Discovery received another distress call from an unexplored sector where a colony ship had gone missing near a planet inhabited by unknown predators. Captain Rodriguez called Jake's unconventional operations team to the briefing room to discuss response options. Standard rescue protocols estimate a 72-hour response time with full military escort, she explained. But the colony ship's life support systems will fail in approximately 48 hours. Jake looked at the tactical display showing the colony ship's last known position. It was definitely going to be dangerous, and the odds of success were not great. But somewhere out there, people needed help that only his team could provide in time. We can reach them in 36 hours. Using the modified shuttle, he said. Same team as before? Pete nodded immediately. I am in. Torgak was already checking his weapons. It will be an honor to fight alongside humans again. Zara consulted her communication device and ran probability calculations in her head. Success probability is approximately 37%, she announced. However, failure to attempt rescue results in 0% survival for the colonists. Jake grinned at her use of human-style logical reasoning. So we go save some colonists, he said. We go save some colonists, Zara agreed, and Jake realized that she had learned to make decisions like a human while still thinking like a Zel-A-Ni. As they prepared for another impossible mission, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed. Since that first encounter with the Razorbacks, he had found his calling as someone who specialized in doing the impossible, discovered that aliens could become family, and somehow managed to fall in love with the most logical person in the galaxy. Discovery's hangar bay doors opened, and their shuttle launched toward another dangerous rescue mission. But this time, Jake was not just fighting for strangers in trouble. He was fighting alongside someone he loved, building a future that no one could have predicted. Outside the shuttle's windows, the stars stretched into lines as they jumped to warp speed, carrying 4 friends toward whatever adventure.